Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the City of Los Angeles's 2023 to 2028 Assessment of Fair Housing session on fair housing and tenant advocacy. We are happy to have this discussion today, and we look forward to hearing from all of you who are key stakeholders and service providers in your field. I am Nancy Tuamaquaboa with the Los Angeles Housing Department, and I'm joined by another LHD staff person who will introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. Joe Montana with the Los Angeles Housing Department. Look forward to the conversation and valuable input that you all will be providing today.
Thanks. I believe we have someone else too. Micah, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. My name is Micah O'Brien. I'm also with the Policy and Research Unit in the Housing Department.
Great, thank you. We also have staff representing the Housing Authority of the City of LA, also known as HACLA. I will turn it over to them to also introduce themselves.
From the Housing Authority, pass it over to Patty and then to Han.
Hi, this is Patricia Mendoza with the Housing Authority.
Hi, I'm Angelina Zargarian. Hi, I'm Angelina Zargarian, an ombudsperson with Housing Authority.
Okay, great. I will now turn it over to Mosaic Community Planning, who is also partnering with LHD and HACLA in developing the city's 5-year assessment of fair housing plan. They will be facilitating our discussion today, and they will start with a presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. I'm Melissa Mayu with Mosaic Community Planning, and I'll be doing a brief introduction of the project and then leading us into a fair housing discussion. And we also have Madison Hughes with Mosaic, who will be taking notes, and you'll see her in the chat as well. And we have a pretty small group tonight, this afternoon. So if anyone or everyone would like to take a moment to introduce themselves and let us know what agency they're from, I think that would be great. Or if you can't talk, if you want to leave it in the chat, that would be fine too.
Hi, my name is Diana Alvarado, and I work for Boston Universal. I'm the director of operations for Boston Universal. Nice to meet everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, my name is Kevin Hermanson. I'm also with Boston.
Great.
Hi, everyone. I'm Glafira Lopez. I'm a community organizer with Strategic Actions for a Just Economy. Nice to meet you.
Hi, I'm Lorraine Lopez. I am an attorney on our housing team at Western Center for Law and Poverty.
Yeah, thanks for joining, Lorraine. And I believe we also have some city planning department staff from the city here as well.
Yes, hi, I'm Elizabeth Gallardo. I'm a city planner with the Housing Policy Unit in City Planning.
Benito, were you gonna talk? I didn't mean to talk over you.
Yes, my name is Benito Flores. I am a reclaimer for El Sereno.
Great, thank you.
Reclaiming our homes.
Thanks. And then we have a couple folks who left their organizations in the chat. So we have Sandra Lopez with the LAUSD Division of Adult and Career Education, Steve Diaz with LA CAN, Sheena Cabo with Physicians for Social Responsibility of Los Angeles, and Kate McKeon with the Public Council. Well, let's see, I think I've got one more. And a couple of folks from city planning, Julia Heidelman and Dominique Ortiz. So thanks everyone for introducing yourselves and for joining us today. I'm gonna start with a quick overview of what we're doing. So we are working on the city's assessment of fair housing, or AFH. And this study will really be analyzing the fair housing landscape throughout the city. So looking at whether everyone is able to access housing suitable for them without fear of unlawful discrimination, and also looking at how well people are able to access different types of community resources and opportunities within their neighborhoods. It's something that's required every 5 years by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for any city or county that receives grant funds. The city is doing this. They did a previous one in 2018, and this one will cover 2023 through 2028. Let's see. And as probably most of you know, as of 2018, the state of California also requires public agencies, cities, counties, housing authorities to prepare fair housing assessments. So we're kind of talking to the experts here in terms of what fair housing is, but our study will be looking at federally protected classes, so race, color, religion, ethnicity, national origin, sex, family status, disability, but also state of California protected classes as well, which you see listed there. So really trying to get an understanding of barriers that people face as they are trying to own, sell, purchase, or rent housing of their choice. We'll look at kind of the owning, renting process, but also look at other factors like being able to obtain insurance, being able to obtain a home loan, fair property appraisals, things like that. Let's see. And as I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, in 2015, HUD adopted their new affirmatively furthering fair housing law, which really called on cities and counties to take a more critical look at the role of housing in their communities. So looking beyond just a focus on housing discrimination, but taking a look at how access to community resources and opportunities, so things like good schools, good jobs, transit, grocery stores, healthcare, a clean environment, how they vary throughout the city, and who is able to live in areas with good access to those resources. Cities also need to work to overcome patterns of segregation, be sure that they're fostering inclusive communities, reduce affordable housing needs, and address barriers to those types of opportunities I just mentioned. So under the Trump administration, this rule was pared back, and essentially the requirement to prepare a fair housing study was suspended. Early in the Biden administration, the rule was reinstated, so requiring up-to-date housing studies. And last month, HUD released a new proposed rule that would further define what those studies look like, what HUD would then call equity plans. That's still in draft form, but it's something that we are monitoring as we are doing this project. Kind of all this to say that given the evolution of fair housing over the last 7 years, this report, like some previous AFHs that the city has done, will take a pretty broad look and really looking at equity related to housing, but also to a lot of different types of neighborhood opportunity factors as well. So a quick overview of what it will contain. We'll have a demographic summary, particularly looking at patterns related to residential segregation, integration, and income. So identifying areas of the city with high levels of segregation, and high levels of poverty or high levels of affluence. So kind of looking how what role income plays in where folks are living and how that looks in terms of racial and ethnic segregation. We will also be looking at opportunities like those that I mentioned: schools, jobs, transit, a clean environment, really a broad range of opportunity types, and whether everyone throughout the city has fair access to those types of resources. We'll consider housing costs and whether affordable housing need varies by protected class. We'll also be looking at public housing, tax credit developments, and other types of affordable housing. So what is available and what part of the city is that in? And then finally, kind of the crux of the report will be a summary of key fair housing issues that we see in Los Angeles, along with goals and strategies to address them over the next 5 years. So those kind of laying out an action plan for addressing the issues that we see. Community inputs, including the input that we'll get from you tonight and that we've gotten from residents and other stakeholders over the last couple months, will really help inform all aspects of the study. So we're glad you're here with us tonight. So in addition to meeting federal requirements, the AFH will really be important to help local leaders make decisions about housing policies and resources. The study will advance past fair housing efforts, so things like the city's housing element that was recently done, things like their 2018 assessment of fair housing. We'll take a look at what came out of that and how can we maybe advance some of those efforts that have been already put in place. As I mentioned, so this is ultimately an action-oriented strategy. So it will impact how the city spends grant funds that it gets from HUD for housing, community development, and homelessness, but also shape other programs, policies, and projects by the city and by HACLA as well. The final plan will be adopted by City Council and HACLA leadership and represent their commitment to expand fair housing and stop future housing discrimination for all residents. And I know that a lot of you are familiar with previous fair housing studies. I think some of you probably even work on the programs that have come out of some of those previous things. So things like the city's law around source of income protection, the city's tenant anti-harassment ordinance, eviction prevention efforts like Stay Housed LA, and other activities like that. We've heard a lot about them to date. I think ways that they can be advanced and improved or improved accountability or implementation. So we're excited to talk about those with you tonight. Before we get into the discussion, quick overview of our timeline. So you can see here that we have a few opportunities for community engagement. We held community meetings at the end of last year and are doing a series of stakeholder meetings and focus groups this month. We also have a survey open that we'll talk more about later in the meeting. And then in July, we will have another meeting similar to this where we are doing some presentation of preliminary findings and strategies in order to get some feedback from you all, make sure that we've captured what you said correctly and reflected that in the document. And then later in the summer, we'll have a full plan available for public review, ultimately getting ready for a fall approval by City Council and HACLA. Let's see. With that, I'll pause for a moment and just ask if anyone has any questions about the study that we're working on or the timeline, but then we can kind of dive into more substantive discussion.
I'm sorry. I want to clarify.
Sure.
Sorry, I didn't see this before. Melissa, can you go back to the last slide?
Yeah. Yes.
With the time, I just want to clarify. I guess step 3 in the process, plan preparation, draft AFH. Where we're at right now, it's actually January 2023 to make.
Oh yes, sorry.
So just want to point that out so people don't think that this is from last year. So just one small correction. All right, sorry.
Yeah, thanks for catching that, Nancy. All right, well, I don't see any hands up for questions, so I think we can get into the discussion. So we encourage everyone to share their ideas out loud. I think the kind of more robust discussion we can have, the better. But if you have ideas that you don't have a chance to share out loud, you can definitely put them in the chat. We also have a SurveyMonkey response form that Madison will place the link to in the chat. So if you don't get a chance to say your ideas tonight, or you think of things after tonight that you'd like to share, please use that link. We'll leave it open for several days so that everyone has time to make sure that we capture all their input. I think with that, we'll jump into our discussion, and I will stop my screen share for it. And so the first question that I have, so in community meetings and surveys, we've heard source of income discrimination by landlords or property managers as one of the most frequently cited fair housing issues. And we wanted to see if that aligns with your experience and if there are areas in the city where you're more likely to see that than others. Kind of get some feedback from you all that are working on the ground on these issues. Anyone like to start?
So one of the things we've heard and continue to hear is, oh, Steve, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
No, go for it, Nancy. I'm happy to follow.
Okay. Just to add on to what Melissa mentioned, what we've heard from our community meetings, and I'm sure all of you are very much well aware, is that the source of income or the city's policy that prohibits source of income discrimination, and also state law that's in place, there still is an issue in terms of residents or potential residents seeking housing. They are experiencing discrimination from landlords. They're continued to be turned away, those who have Section 8 vouchers. And so it's happening in terms of that discrimination, perhaps because there are loopholes that landlords are finding and using. And so the issue has been, the issue of enforcement of the law, right? So there needs to be further enforcement. There needs to be something put in place to really strengthen that, the prohibition against discrimination. So that is what we've been hearing. And so we just wanted to hear from you all if that's what you're also experiencing with folks that you're working with. Are there any particular challenges in being able to really hold landlords accountable? And so we just wanted to hear from you all. Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say this point is kind of it goes through on different forms, but definitely when you're looking at the access point in terms of accessing housing, the requirement to have 2/3, sometimes 3.5 of income that's being sort of enforced is sort of a means of, well, not necessarily this is necessarily turning you away, but this is criteria that we would want you to sort of have. And then of course the other issue would be around sort of, this happens a lot for folks transitioning out of homelessness, not having the needed sort of documentation. That, for example, like we had members who have identification, but it's expired. So like, where does that sort of come in?
Okay, so it sounds like setting other criteria, particularly related to income, so high that it sort of discounts folks who have a voucher, not because of their voucher, but because of their income.
Right, so that turns, the pivot has been not necessarily to talk about the voucher, but figure out other means to get folks out.
Okay,
Sorry, not, excuse me, not getting folks out, but not get folks in.
sure.
Right. And so I think that's a great example in terms of, perhaps the loopholes that landlords are finding. So it's one, a great example in terms of what needs to be strengthened there.
We have a comment from the chat as well that tenants often talk about how they endure harassment and habitability issues with their current housing because they know they won't be able to qualify to other housing because of income requirements. And for voucher holders, we hear from community members that landlords will harass them to leave their current homes, especially when there's a change in property owners, which there's been an increase in.
I'll go ahead and
yeah.
comment on that. Yeah, so I talked specifically, I've talked to a couple of community members that will come through our tenant action clinic, or we'll go door knocking. And yeah, that's often the case. So we see a lot of, first of all, when it's when tenants are living in large scale units, right? We see a lot of harassment there. But especially when they are when there are Section 8 voucher holders, there's a huge like, I guess, like, evidence of harassment, and it specifically targets those tenants so that they're able to leave. And that harassment it can be very explicit, and like they'll literally post 3-day notices on without an actual at fault reason for evicting these tenants. And then we also see, again, like the neglect in addressing habitability issues with these tenants. They specifically won't do repairs because it's like a tactic that we've seen that landlords will use so that tenants eventually self-evict.
Yeah, we heard a bit about that in community meetings as well, or kind of that the tenant anti-harassment law needs more enforcement and more teeth to really be successful at preventing tenants from facing that.
Yeah, definitely.
Another comment from Benito from the chat that City Council has the monopoly of creating laws that intentionally allow rents to rise, low minimum wage, which creates homelessness, and an article that he shared there. And some agreements with Glafira's comment that Section 8 holders get told they should be grateful to have a roof over their heads to discourage them from complaining. Are there programs or policies or maybe changes to existing policies that you would like to see the city make in order to kind of strengthen the tenant anti-harassment, Section 8 protection? What types of resources would be helpful to have more teeth for those? And maybe, so we talked a little bit about, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think like having tenants specifically having knowledge to the right that they can sue, right? I think that that's a huge one, because I think a lot of the times landlords are getting away with this specifically because tenants won't know that they're allowed to sue, right? There's not as much like resources, I would say, that inform tenants of that. And then also when it comes to like actually suing, right, not having access to legal help there is a huge like I guess like discrepancy. I think like in addition to that, right, it's yeah, I think that there definitely should be a larger penalty, especially for like against landlords if they're practicing, harassment, if they're practicing discrimination. I think that there should be a huger consequence basically for landlords doing this. And another thing too, when it comes to, I know a lot of the times when we, from our tenant action clinic, we send tenants to the Los Angeles Housing Department. We'll send them to the Department of Public Health. A lot of the times the inspections aren't, thorough enough in terms of like, like the evidence that that like is needed to be collected, right? A lot of the times either like the inspection isn't done thoroughly, or something happens, but or like there's no follow through on their casework, with different agencies. And so that's where the like tenants are basically like discouraged to continue to complain, because there's no actual consequence or resolution that comes about, or if there is, it just takes a very long time. And we often instruct people of how to navigate those the systems, because otherwise there's not much that's done. But yeah, that's my comment, and I'll let Lorraine talk.
Oh, yeah, thank you. And yeah, go ahead, Lorraine.
So I wanted to build on what Glafira mentioned at the beginning of her comment, was not only informing tenants of their opportunity to sue, and that this is a remedy right under the tenant anti-harassment ordinance and other laws, right, that are present in the city of Los Angeles. But as far as tenant anti-harassment goes, I think it's really important that the city does put more teeth behind this, and that the city attorney's office actually starts prosecuting landlords who engage in a lot of this conduct. And I am not as on the ground anymore as a lot of my colleagues here, but when I was working with groups like SAGE, and a lot of the behavior that landlords engage in is very criminal in nature. There's property destruction, there are threats of physical violence. I think these got a lot worse over the pandemic, right? When we had the eviction protections in place because of the pandemic and the health, emergency that we were experiencing. But unfortunately, I think even having this on the books, kind of relying on tenants and the very few attorneys out there in LA who can take these cases, it's putting a huge burden on tenants when there is at least a mechanism for the city attorney to be involved, not only in the tenant anti-harassment ordinance, but also in code enforcement violations, right? That there's also a remedy in there that allows for prosecution by the city attorney.
Okay, so more action kind of on the city's attorney part.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of the folks here I know are from grassroots organizations, and they rely on, the private bar and the few legal assistance organizations that, can help. And unfortunately, the demand just really outpaces how many attorneys are actually available to take on these lawsuits privately.
Okay. Yeah, Steve.
Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting.
No problem.
Yeah, I definitely want to echo the sort of city attorney enforcement piece. I feel like that's something that needs to be uplifted. But I also think from just programmatic side, it feels like the housing department is limited because of sort of documentation and due diligence that needs to occur. So there has to be a better way to create sort of systems for documenting the interactions that then get brought to the housing department. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but maybe it's a questionnaire that the inspector has to fill out that can sort of help justify. Maybe it's some of the inspectors' sort of documentation that they create, because there has to be an easier way to sort of facilitate it from tenant issue all the way up. And at times with very limited sort of legal support makes it even harder.
Okay, so some kind of standard form of documentation that tenants could use to kind of document their case without having to have a lot of legal experience of their own.
Right, but that can also follow the track as the item goes through, right? Because the housing department then sends it to the city attorney. The city attorney is gonna be like, there's not enough documentation here, we can't do much. So like, how does that sort of get bridged?
Okay. Yeah, that's great input. Yeah, Sandra?
Hi. So this is new to me. I'm learning, I'm trying to advocate for my students. Currently, I work with students who have disabilities and are on Section 8 housing. I'm currently working with a student who lives in an area that is unsafe for her, and I'm not quite understanding how somebody with a disability would be placed in a location that is unsafe in that. So I don't know what goes into that, or if she's reporting that, she's being mistreated, what are the sort of avenues she could tap into to get support? Because she did report that her landlord was not going to do anything about it. So it feels like there was no support there. I feel like she was just like, I have to wait till my lease is up and then I have to find another housing, but there wasn't no emergency outlet for somebody in that situation who is dealing with a disability and whose neighbor was almost experiencing domestic abuse. So I'm not really sure also how I can provide these resources to my student, but having some kind of information about what she can do would be very helpful.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think we can probably provide either in this meeting or afterwards by email some information about who she could contact. But I think maybe your comment also hints at a larger issue of sort of people not having information about who to go to if they are facing harassment or living in unsafe conditions, or things that should be addressed, not having general knowledge about what kind of resources are available.
Yeah, and what I'll do is I'll put in the chat, Sandra, the number to our rent hotline. So if there's any issues that are being faced by any tenants that you're working with, they should be able to reach out to our rent hotline staff, and they can address those issues. If need be, they will open up a case, and there would be an investigator assigned, and then they will go ahead and look into the issue that is taking place at their housing site, and perhaps look into reach out to the landlord themselves. So I'll provide that in the chat.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. Let's see. So it sounds like kind of general, more information about what help is available and maybe what the benefits might be to making a complaint. Maybe along those lines, a question for you. Are you aware of any cases where enforcement, I think we're thinking particularly related to Section 8 or housing choice voucher, source of income discrimination, where enforcement was particularly successful? Do you feel like there is much success in getting landlords to accept vouchers when someone comes in with a complaint that they haven't? All right, well, certainly if you think of some that occur to you after this meeting, if you want to share them in that SurveyMonkey forum, that would be great. Maybe switching gears a little bit, other barriers that we heard from people were related to credit history, poor credit history, past evictions, criminal records, that those were frequent barriers to being able to access housing that disproportionately impacts several protected classes. Does that align with what you hear from folks looking for housing? Are those things that you hear about as barriers? And maybe if so, are there approaches you'd like to see the city or housing authority take to address some of those barriers?
Can you repeat the last part of the question, please?
Yeah, sure. So thinking about barriers like credit history or past eviction or past criminal records, are those things that you see pretty frequently as barriers to folks obtaining housing? And if so, are there strategies you'd like to see the city or housing authority explore to reduce some of those barriers, to address those? Yeah, Diana.
So I agree that those are definitely a lot of barriers that our, clients encounter. And from what I've heard, or from what I understand, is that Section 8 tenants, when they rent, when they like move, or they have to pay the deposit in full. So like maybe their portion is only like $41, but then the rent is, higher. So then the deposit is higher, and they have a hard time moving because they can't pay the deposit. And obviously if they're getting any money, they have to report the extra income, and then, they don't want to lose their voucher, or they don't want the amount to be modified. So I think that creates a barrier, and like what, people were saying, that that's why a lot of times they'll just stay in their homes even though they have problems, because like, how are they going to move if they don't have deposit money?
Okay, so security deposits as kind of another barrier that.
Correct.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, Glafira?
Yeah, I think definitely a huge one is the past eviction notices, right? And I think what's very frustrating about that is specifically because we have a lot of tenants that'll come into our clinic that a lot of the times they're being evicted for reasons that are not even their fault, right? Like again, the harassment, or they'll, I had a tenant that the landlord basically retaliated for her having made a complaint with LAHD and try to evict her through that. Thankfully she was able to get representation, right? But had she not, she would have been evicted. That would have gone on her case. And I think that, and sometimes, right, tenants will just self-evict as soon as they get a 3-day notice because they're afraid that that's going to go on their credit history. That's often a question we get here, like, oh, is that going to go on my credit history? So because then I'd rather not. So I think like when it comes, I think like an initiative to remove that as a barrier, honestly, to remove tenants having a past eviction like on their history. I think that that's especially important in LA because we do see we are seeing large numbers of evictions right now, and if we want to resolve the issue of homelessness, it's like where if people aren't able to move forward after their eviction, whether it was at their fault or because they fell behind on rent, or or for a harassment issue or whatever it is, right? I think that that's especially important and key in LA to be able to resolve that homelessness crisis.
Thank you. Yeah, so kind of preventing evictions on the front end, but then also maybe some strategies to not allow past evictions as a criteria. Let's see. Maybe I'll ask before we move on if there are. Well, first, I did want to note that Nancy left in the chat the number to the LAHD's rent hotline and an address or a website to file a complaint. So, Sandra, that might be a good resource for you. But before we move on to another question, wanted to ask if there are any other like forms of discrimination that you see frequently, or housing barriers that you feel like you're frequently seeing folks face as they're trying to apply for housing, or even once they're living in housing. Anything that we haven't talked about yet? All right, well then, maybe I'll ask this next question. So the city recently passed several new renter protections. So just cause eviction protection ordinance, relocation assistance if you're evicted, eviction prevention for tenants that are less than 1 month behind on rent, requirements that landlords send notice of all terminations to LAHD. So a variety of different types of eviction preventions. What kind of things do you feel like will be most critical for those to be successful? Are there particular, yeah, Maria.
Hi, Maria with Sage and here with Glafira. I think really enforcement and the knowing that you can get in trouble if you do it, because that's the issue that that we do not think that folks that are doing this type of like things know that there's repercussions, or that that they're not allowed to be doing this. And I know now they are supposed to be posting signage, which is great. That information and enforcement is going to be really important. I know one example is that I know even my mother-in-law lives in the city of LA, got a rent increase, notified the landlord that you couldn't get a rent increase right now because lives in Boyle Heights. And we were trying to make sure that the landlord know that he couldn't raise the rent. We don't think that the landlord knew because he's a Spanish speaker, mom and pop landlord. So that was like, even then, like even as property owners not knowing that, right? But even when they do know, there's our experience is that they don't think that there are any repercussions. Yeah, that's what I would like.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think we heard that in the community meetings as well, that a lot of times, small landlords, mom and pop landlords are maybe not aware of laws. And then, like you said, another group that are aware of them, but, don't follow them. But maybe different approaches to both of those groups. One maybe more education about laws, and like you said, the other education that you can get in trouble, and there are consequences for doing that. Okay, thank you. Anyone else ideas about kind of what will make these new laws successful, or kind of what will ensure their implementation works well?
Yes, I have a suggestion. The ordinance that came out, the Just Cause ordinance, I have a PDF of it that I think was passed around on a listserv, and that's my only access to it, and I keep it close so I can access it. I don't see the ordinance in the municipal code. When I look on, like if you Google Los Angeles Municipal Code, it's not in there yet. At least the one that we most use, the American Legal Publishing. And it took me a while to find it, even the PDF, if I try to find it from like the housing website, or sometimes there's like LA Times articles that mention it, but they don't actually link to it. So I think just accessibility to the ordinance, making it available and easily accessed, maybe through different points. For example, on the housing website, maybe a button on the top that says, check out the new Just Cause ordinance, and just ways to make sure it appears in the top of a Google search. New law 2023 Los Angeles, or for tenants, something like that. Key ways that you can get it and make it available. I liked how there was the Los Angeles temporary moratorium. And that one, the landlords actually had to serve it on the tenants. Whenever they served a copy of an eviction notice, they had to serve a copy of that, or the copy of the protections notice that referenced it. So just making it available so that advocates can access it, as well as tenants.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a great point, and maybe something that will be or could be addressed prior to the fall when this study is out as well, kind of just in terms of accessibility to the language of the law. Yes, Maria.
The other thing too is knowing that they have someone to go to, right? Like knowing that they have the resources, for example, attorneys, is just very important. And I mean, we're all, you all folks know that we're working on, or the city is currently writing an ordinance around right to counsel, which is something that we've been advocating for many years. So continued funding for that, continued education, awareness is very important in all languages.
Okay. Sure. Good point about language access as well. Let's see, maybe, so when we're talking about kind of making sure that this information is available to people, what are some of the best avenues to get the word out? Maybe something as simple as kind of including that in, if you're giving someone a lease, you have to also give them information about what rights, what resources they have. Are there other ways that would be, pretty effective, you think, for getting the word out to tenants about their rights and what resources are available?
So I think like the first thing that comes to mind, right? I know that landlords are required to post large, like, if they have large, so they're required to post that. Fortunately, a lot of the times, we hear that they don't. And then again, there's no like penalty really that's enforced on them when they don't. So I think that that's what makes it difficult when the responsibility is put on the landlord and then there's no I guess like consequences for them not doing something that they're supposed to do. So I think yeah, I mean I wanted to share that, but also I think yeah, like I wonder if like literally mailing it out to tenants, mailing that out to them, like if that if that's something that if it's possible, I think that would be a way to start. So yeah, and then of course, like the connections to community serving organizations, that's always key. But then people that aren't connected to them, then that to those organizations, that's where it's helpful, either like individual like letter sending or school outreach or something like that.
Yeah, I think school outreach is a really great idea as well. And I think Nancy left some links in the chat to where the ordinance, the Just Cause ordinance, is available online. But with the note that the information does need to be more easily accessible for the public and service providers. Yeah. Sorry, Nancy, I didn't mean to speak over you.
No. Thanks for speaking it out. That's it.
Yeah, sure. Other ideas about kind of what are effective ways of getting the word out about rights and resources for tenants? Yeah, Maria.
I would say continue to fund the organizations that are doing the work, right? Like because as part of the right to counsel, I mean, there has to be more education and awareness for us to be able to pass, inform people, but also be able to to refer people to the city, to LA Housing Department, to this phone number, to etc. But we need also the capacity. So definitely that's and that actually, it opens up the doors for many people if we are able to have funding to be able to do this outreach.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a great point, that as you're doing advertisement about resources available, you have to make sure that you're funding the agencies that are providing those resources kind of at appropriate levels. Let's see. What about any other partners that you feel like could help publicize some of this information? I think the schools are a great example, but any other partners in the community that would be good options?
Maybe the self-help centers and the courts.
Okay.
Since a lot of, if when tenants get the eviction, they usually go to the court to get their paperwork. And then, hopefully they're directed to the self-help centers. And then from there, they may go to like other organizations, but at least that information's in the court. And, obviously like us legal service providers, that's another way.
Okay.
I know some legal service providers have workshops, so at workshops.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Let's see. Benito also left in the chat that HACLA has the obligation of providing permanent housing to reclaimers according to contract and California Health and Safety Code. But in 3 years has not led to a single permanent housing. But HACLA spends money on court fees and attorneys, thousands of homeless, I think thousands of funds that should go to homeless folks. Okay, sorry, some additional information. Oh, and an article there that he links to, I think, with some more information about that topic. So we'll take a look at that as well. Thank you. Let's see. So maybe switching topics a little bit, the city's 2021 to 2029 housing element identified greatest displacement pressure in Central, South, and East LA. Does that align with kind of where you're seeing some of the greatest displacement risk, or are there other neighborhoods where you're frequently seeing loss of affordable housing happening? Glafira, you're nodding along. Does that sound right to you, that those are the neighborhoods where you're seeing most displacement?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in South Central, we've seen an increase, right? Like a very large increase of loss of affordable housing for sure. And yeah, I mean, we don't work as much in East LA, right? We work with the LA County tenants, but not as much with East LA. But we're partnered with East Side Leads, and that's definitely a huge concern of theirs. So yes, I was just agreeing to that.
Okay.
But definitely, if there's other areas that I'm unaware of them. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else, kind of areas where you're seeing displacement most frequently? Yeah, Maria.
We're seeing some displacement, like Glafira mentioned, in South LA. I mean, as where there's investments, right? For example, the university,
Okay.
you know, these types of investment that are geared towards some events that are happening, right, in a couple years, 2028 specifically. That's what specifically we see. Also, the proximity to the university has always been, and I believe they're not here today, but folks in the east side are also dealing with that in El Sereno, Lincoln Heights, again, because of the expansion of the university on that side as well.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. That was something that we were discussing in another meeting as well, kind of how large university campuses kind of can impact the neighborhood and housing there. So thank you for that. Yeah, Katie.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so to this question, I do think Public Council does a lot of work in the South LA region, Spot 8, and I think we see a lot of kind of displacement and gentrification in that area generally, but it tends to be made worse or there's even more barriers there because of sort of the overlapping jurisdictions and people not knowing whether they're in the city of LA, incorporated, or even in like Inglewood and some of the other smaller cities in the South there. So I know some of that's obviously outside of your jurisdiction, but thinking about how to effectively help folks who call the city of LA but aren't in the city of LA, and then being able to direct them to the appropriate resources like quickly and helping them understand their rights in those different jurisdictions, I think is really important.
Yeah, sure. So maybe some cooperation to make sure that folks are getting routed to the right place. Nancy, I don't know if you have any information about kind of what happens if someone calls LAHD, but they're outside of the city boundaries. Maybe they're just referred to another agency.
Yeah, if they're outside of the city of LA, there is of course LA County that serves LA County, the unincorporated areas as well. So that would be the other housing provider. So that is, pretty much where they would likely need to get services. But yeah, so that would be our counterpart, the county.
Thanks, but yeah, so maybe some opportunity to, or even information that goes out to folks that live in those areas could kind of possibly include information for both areas, so that people are kind of not scrambling to find out where they should be served. Thanks. What about when you think of populations that face the greatest risk of displacement, or who is that generally? Not necessarily geographically, but what demographics tend to face the greatest issues with displacement?
You said like what are the populations that we see like face the greater amounts of displacement?
Mm-hmm.
Definitely Black community members, specifically, right? African American community members that have like really been in the, like I guess like a large part of founding South Central, I would say.
Okay.
We see a lot of displacement of those community members that have lived there like 20 years, 30 years. They have generations of family members. We have research that shows, right, of the specifically, right, because I work specifically around the USC area here in South Central, and there's I believe it was about a 10% decrease in the last like decade, right? So that's really significant. Yeah, so I think that's I think we really have to recognize that and you know, do something about that because it, you know, I think yeah. And I think aside from that, right, we do see, you know, disabled folks as well, heavily displaced, like I mentioned earlier with the Section 8 housing, right? Like a lot of, you know, those people are being, you know, very harassed, heavily targeted because they're paying the lower rents, and there's such a push to increase rents and, you know, to gentrify these same communities. So they're often the ones really, you know, bearing the burden.
Mhm.
Also, I would say a lot of monolingual immigrant speakers, right? Because a lot of the times there's like there's the increase in harassment there is because of the either the language barrier or not, or the fear of being targeted for being undocumented, for example. We see a lot of a lot of like that tactic being used with those communities, and you know, unfortunately, we see the displacement there as well.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, we'll look at population data. So kind of like you were referencing, looking at how demographics have changed in the city. But I think it's really good to have kind of you all's on the ground perspective too about who's being impacted. So thank you. Let's see. Yeah, Maria.
Yeah, they're writing it on there. Seniors, folks with fixed incomes, disabled. Again, like, I mean, look at like what's happening in Chinatown with Hillside Villa. You know, just in general, like, right, like, just you hear it all over that seniors are unfortunately, because of their income, their limited income, and they're not able to then pay, you know. So we definitely need to mention that they are. And then maybe sometimes they get lost through the cracks because maybe they'll join a family member. So like live in with a family. So you won't necessarily be able to see their eviction stories.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think too, you know, these are again kind of examples of folks that maybe have less resources for moving somewhere else or obtaining kind of legal assistance and resources that they might need in the meantime. So thank you, yeah, for these. And Lorraine, thank you too for what you wrote in the chat. Let's see. Are there any additional approaches that you think you'd like to see the city or HACLA consider regarding preservation of affordable housing or helping to stop the risk of gentrification?
I think maybe if just gentrification is going to be happening because we see it growing, there should be a real big push for hiring people that are in the area and providing job opportunities to the people that live there, as opposed to raising their rent and then they no longer can afford it. So there has to be that responsibility for the whoever's coming in to provide an extra support for the community.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So kind of some resources for folks who live there now, job opportunities, things like that.
I would like to add that when like unlawful detainer cases are filed, that if the city would make it a requirement, like in order for the landlord to file or to win the eviction case, they have to do, you know, like add more requirements to what the landlord has to do to win the case. Some of the defenses, like a lot of tenants go to court, they file a very quick answer, and then but some of the defenses are not available if like they have to plead them, you know, because it's like they have to do the affirmatively, like they actually have to click the box. But if we made the landlord, like before you proceed with the eviction, or even if you proceed, but if you didn't do X, then you can't win the case. And then if we in the ordinances can put like, you know, that if you didn't do this and knowing the requirements and you didn't follow the requirements, then, you know, reasonable attorney's fees, the other side can ask for reasonable attorney's fees, because then it makes it more expensive for the landlord. And, you know, the tenants will have this defense, and the landlord is more likely to dismiss the case if that were, you know, part of the ordinance.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you correctly, like building in some steps that landlords have to, you know, whatever the things are, do these things to attempt to resolve an issue before they take it to court. And if they can't show that they have, then they wouldn't be able to win. Am I reflecting that back right?
Yes.
Okay. And that if they kind of are filing frivolous cases, that tenants would be awarded attorney's fees too.
Correct.
Okay. Well, I'll ask, yeah, go ahead, Clefira.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't want to take up too much space, but I think like going back to right again, like the consequences on landlords. I think yeah, it's a lot, right? So I think so first of all, right, we know that there's an increase of corporate landlords that are buying up the properties in South Central, specifically, right, which where I work in, you know, Sage again, LA County. But yeah, I think like that's a huge one and I don't know, right? Like I don't know if that's something that HACLA and or like the city can really do, but like the reality is that is a huge like a lot of these corporate landlords that are buying up these properties, they're often the ones that are increasing rents illegally, even when there are rent controlled properties. A lot of the times these are the landlords that are harassing tenants, which eventually leads to any either like self-eviction basically, right? So or like, you know, they're illegally evicting tenants basically. So I think that's a huge one. And then so I think like with that, right, like for the city or HACLA to I get like pass policy, right, that's gonna prevent the buying of from corporate landlords at the levels that we're seeing it now. And yeah, and again having more consequences for landlords that are evicting tenants, especially illegally.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really good point about kind of corporate landlords that are buying lots of properties, and not something that is unique to LA either. I think that's kind of a trend throughout the country, that there are places where a lot of units, a lot of homes are being purchased by corporations, and then, like you said, rent goes up. So yeah, that's something that we'll, I think we're looking for some data on so that we can reflect that in the report, but some possible strategies too. So thank you. Yeah, Maria.
Yeah, in terms of the corporate landlords, we would be happy to share more about the research that we've done. A lot of other folks have done research on that. And in terms of what Glafira was mentioning about, like, well, there's an example in the South LA area, in the South LA Community Plan, specifically in the South LA CPIO. It's the Community Plan Implementation Overlay Zone, where it actually had, after 2-3 year, I'll say, advocacy fight, you know, education, information, research, all that stuff. They're just passed a motion, or I think it's going to become an ordinance now, or it's either going to go back to CPC or something. But we're basically in that specific area around in the CPIO, the USC area. When if a landlord doesn't tell you that you have the right to come back, because you qualify to come back because you're a low income tenant that can come back to that housing, there is actually an opportunity for tenants to do a private right of action. So I think that that's a really good opportunity, and that's something that the city can and should examine all over the city, and in particular in areas of more displacement pressures. Like, for example, we're mentioning these areas where there's a lot of incentives for investment. Also a big area of South LA is an area called an opportunity zone, where investors are still investing in opportunity zones to get the tax breaks. I think just like, I know that, there's statewide laws that are still being implemented, but always being one step ahead of the game, I think, is important. Because again, like, if tenants are not aware of their rights, like Lafita said, if they get a letter saying your unit's going to be demolished, whether it's in 5 years, they're going to leave, versus your unit's going to be demolished. However, if you qualify, you can come back. That's when we need more information and education.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So maybe a model that could be used throughout the city. And yeah, I think we would be interested in talking to you more about some of the research you've done regarding corporate landlords. So maybe connect after this meeting. I think we have your email addresses. That would be great. I'll ask now if there's any topics that I haven't asked about or we haven't touched on that you feel like we should know as we're doing this report, or thoughts you came to this meeting hoping to talk about that we haven't had a chance to yet. Please feel free to share those now. All right, then we have a couple last slides that I'll jump back to. And maybe before going, Benito, thank you very much for the articles you left in the chat. We definitely will take a look at those after the meeting and digest them a little more. So thank you. Let me start this screen share back. So we really appreciate everyone's input tonight. Your thoughts and ideas about housing and neighborhoods in LA will truly make the study stronger and communicate to the city and HECLA what priorities and strategies Los Angeles should focus on over the next 5 years. So thank you so much. We hope you'll stay involved in the project. You can see that web address there, housing.lacity.org/residence/assessment of fair housing with dashes between them. I think Madison may have just placed that in the chat. So you can go there to see videos from previous meetings that we've had, including community meetings that we had in December. And as we have more opportunities for engagement, they will be on that site as well. And of course, as we have drafts of the reports, that's the place to access them too. Also on that website, you will see that we have a survey open. There's one for folks that represent organizations. So certainly if you all haven't had a chance to take that yet, we would appreciate it if you do. There's also a second survey that's open to anyone in the community. So folks that live or work in LA. It's available in 7 different languages, and there's a link to it there. So if you're able to share that with clients, residents, colleagues, neighbors, anyone who you think may be interested, we would really appreciate any help you can give in getting the word out. If you have social media that you'd feel comfortable sharing that survey link on, we would appreciate it. And then lastly, we also have hard copies of it in all 7 languages. So if there's ever an opportunity where you feel like you could share hard copies with a group, feel free to email that lahd.afhpolicy@lacity.org. Just let us know how many copies you need, and we are more than happy to mail those out to you. There's also the SurveyMonkey form from this meeting that I believe Madison put in the chat. So if you have more comments about some of these discussion questions after tonight, feel free to share them there, and we will capture them and include them with the rest of the inputs for the study. And with that, I will turn it over to Nancy to close us out.
Yeah, so as I'm just going to reiterate what Melissa said, we are encouraging all of you to stay involved in the city's assessment of fair housing process. Your input today was very useful. We appreciate it, and we want this to continue as we move forward in our process. We also want to make sure that you visit the AFH webpage that we have posted here on this slide to stay up to date on our activity. There's going to be other events in this process. So we really want you to remain engaged. That is, the site will be where we're posting our different updates there for you to be able to just stay up to date. We're also asking that, again, that you complete the stakeholder survey found on the webpage. That's yet another way in which we're able to receive your feedback. And since you all registered for this meeting, you are already part of our email list. So you'll receive updates that we're sending to our contacts about our work. So please stay tuned. And if you have any additional ideas to share after today, please email us at the email address that we have, lahd.afhpolicy@lacity.org. We welcome any additional thoughts that you have. And also please spread the word to others, that your colleagues and those that you're serving. If they want to stay involved, if they want to know, be part of this assessment of fair housing process, please let them know that they can ask to be added to our contact list by emailing us. It will be good because notices that we send out down the line about our draft assessment for a housing plan that's available for public comment. They'll be able to get notices of that firsthand. And we thank you again for taking time to participate in today's assessment of fair housing discussion, and we hope you continue to stay connected. And with that, we will close the meeting and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.